Well, hello, Viva Albertos. JP Hill here with you. Let me see here, Adam, Gabe, and Blake. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves here in a minute for what will be our minor league season review for the 2023 season. Off the cuff here, looking at it seem like it's a pretty decent year, at least for the hitters on the farm, and there's some pitchers that stand out as well. So we got a lot to talk about. But first of all, let's catch up with the guys. Adam, man, how's it going?
Good, man. Just got back from work, just looking forward to talk about some of these prospects. It's a tough year, so at least something to look forward to for next year.
Yeah, finally some good news podcasting for us. Gabe, how's it going, man?
Going good. Busy at work. I got off work not too long ago too. It sucks, but I'm excited to talk about the Cardinals prospects.
Yeah. And Blake, how's it going, man?
It's good. It's Light I'm opening day today. If any Dominican Winter League fans out there, it's going to be a great 3 months.
Yeah. I'm sure we're all going to catch that. But you will, and then we'll reach your write-ups. So anyway, but yeah, this is all about minor leagues. And so we've got three guys here that know a lot about it. Blake does a lot of writing on minor leagues for the site. Gabe does too. And Adam has come in and joined us as well. And I think Adam's got some access to some minor league numbers and stats too that are pretty helpful and useful at times. So I'm going to be the dumb guy in the room, which, as I joked earlier, is always true, but I hide it better than I will today. So today I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to offer my opinion. You shouldn't listen to anything that I say, but you should definitely listen to what these guys say because they know what they're talking about. And so we will start by just kind of going from a big picture perspective. I want to hand out a few awards. And what I want to do is just have all four of us go, and I think I can handle this one. We're going to give our minor league player of the year, definitely a minor league hitter, and then we'll see if we could get to 4 minor league pitchers of the year. I mean, maybe you guys can. It seemed like there was one pitcher that had a good season for the Cardinals minor league season. So we'll see how that goes. But so what I want from you guys is your overall take on how the system went this year, and then also your minor league player and or pitcher of the year. Let's start with Blake. Blake, go.
So, I mean, the system was fine. I don't think there was really a ton of talent in the system at the beginning of the year, honestly. The Cardinals did a pretty good job of adding talent through the draft. It's granted a lot of those guys haven't even played like 50 games yet, so it's still hard to tell. But the trade deadline, really, where they draft the deadline, the system got a whole lot better this year. So as we I think later talk about like grades for the system as a whole, it's kind of tough to grade it considering, I mean, from where they started, where they finished, there's a lot more talent, but overall in the system, it was still a solid year. And I think honestly, if I remember, did all four full season affiliates make the playoffs? Or was it three of the four?
I don't think
No, Palm Beach and Springfield did for sure.
Palm Beach and Springfield did. Did Memphis? I think Memphis made it too.
I didn't think Memphis
Wrong?
made it.
I don't think they did. They were like below 500, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think so.
And then,
But yeah, I mean that's still a change. Like the last couple of years, it was like the Cardinals had basically no farm teams make the playoffs. So seeing a couple of them make it is a little bit of a return to normalcy. But now, what was it? Player of the year? I mean, I think it's hard to go anyone else than Luke and Baker, which like is kind of a boring answer for a 26-year-old first base only guy who struggled in the majors. But I mean, the guy just absolutely obliterated the ball in AAA. So I mean, I think if you want to go to like an actual prospect, at least in my mind, it's probably Ivan Herrera. But it's really hard to. Nah, you got to do Luke and Baker justice when he earned it. So
I mean, it's a performance award.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're going to get. We're going to get to prospects and talent and all of those things. But if we're talking about player of the year, it's a performance award. Luke and Baker, 15% walk rate, 180 WRC plus, 33 home runs, 720 slugging percentage down in Memphis. He was basically Mark McGwire down there at age 26. So pretty incredible stuff. So do you got a pitcher to go along with that, Blake?
Yeah, pitcher, I'd say Max Radrick. He kind of stood out. I think he led the system in, at least among pitchers with 50 innings pitched or more. He led the system in FIP. He led it in like K rate minus walk rate. Honestly, he was kind of known to be that kind of command control guy coming out of that college, but the stuff didn't have a ton of strikeout rate ticked down a little bit in high A, but it's still intriguing. He has a good ride on the fastball, a nice curveball, Slider looks promising, so nice little changeup too. It's a decent little 4-pitch mix from a guy the Cardinals took in the middle rounds, which is honestly where they thrive. So he's just kind of the latest guy in a line of some really, really good middle round picks who have all outperformed their what you would expect from somebody taken at that spot.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go this way from my screen, which probably will be the same that you're looking at if you're watching on YouTube. So Gabe, you can't pick Luke and Baker. So that's rule number one. And then you can't pick what pitcher did you take?
He picked
Max
Matt.
Radvik.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So you can't pick
Well,
him. You
he
gotta
would've
pick
been my-
someone else, acknowledging that you might have picked Lucan or whoever, you got to go down the list. So overall opinion of the system right now, your take on that, and then your 2 award winners if you have to.
Okay. I mean, I'd say if you could retroactively pretend that the guys we got in trades were in the system the whole year, I think it was a great year for the system. But obviously, well, you could, I guess. So JC almost hit enough in Springfield to count for the whole year.
Yeah, I mean they are in our system, so you yeah, right.
I'm not. He's not my pick though, because I'm gonna go with the full year guy. But yeah, I mean, I like where the system's at. My thing with the minor league system is that it complements what the major league team needs more so than like ranking first or second or third or whatever. And I feel like we got a lot of high minor guys who are pitchers, which we're going to need over the next couple of years, depending on what we do this offseason, of course. And our position player talent in the major leagues doesn't really need much replenishing, and yet we still have Sajasi and Prieto and a couple guys down the line. So I like where our system's at overall. As far as my hitter of the year, I don't know if he's strictly speaking got the best performance, but my pick is Victor Scott because of I'll pretend that his defense is like plus 30 to push him over Luke and Baker or something. He also got the stolen bases, of course.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was actually going to be my pick until you guys mentioned Luke and Baker, who I think prospect when I thought hitter of the year. So he did not go to my. I mean, I know he's a prospect technically, but I'm not a believer in him personally.
You guys, no rules on this one. You can take who are. The only rule is you can't repeat the person that someone that's already been taken.
Okay.
That's the only rule. Yeah.
And I think I'm going to make it difficult for pitcher of the year for Adam and you because my pick is going to be Ian Bedell as the pitcher of the system. Especially with he's definitely the comeback player of the minor league system, I would say. Mm-hmm. Just because he reestablished himself as the pitching prospect the Cardinals drafted, and he looks like he could become something. At minimum, he'll be probably a solid reliever. So he was the one who elevated his prospect status the most with his performance, which is kind of how I would judge these kind of things. And I think the same with Scott, who maybe should be considered top 100 prospect in my opinion, but I don't know if that's going to be where he ends up.
Yeah, should be, probably won't, but yeah.
Right.
Good. Adam, big picture and your award winners.
Yeah, so I would agree with what you guys said, essentially, with the overall assessment of the farm system, right? Going into the year was probably a C, really around league average, maybe slightly below, at least in my opinion. And then, they did the due diligence at the deadline, shedding some of those free agency eligible guys at the end of the year. And, they got to Roby, Thomas and Jesse have headlined the prospect package, and they've been fantastic for the Cardinals in the minor leagues. So, Blake, I'm kind of surprised you didn't mention it was Sajasi to be your top guy, at least from your hitters, because yeah, that's fair enough. And I mean, to be fair, it was only like part of the season, and your criteria might have not been looking up for the full scope. But in that regard, I'm going to go ahead and take Sajasi just because he's a part of the season at the end. I think he's probably got the highest upside of the Cardinals hitting prospects, not named Ivan Herrera, and maybe potentially Mason Wynn, obviously, right? So aside from those guys, I would probably take Thomas Sajasi ahead of Victor Scott, at least personally, even if Gabe had already said it. In terms of your pitchers, you did kind of make it difficult, and there wasn't a ton of options, because even if they addressed that need at the deadline, I'm still probably going to go ahead and go with Tink Hens, because he did struggle in Double-A, and he's very, very likely to repeat Double-A, go back to Springfield. Even at high A ball, he was still really good. And in my opinion, if he's not the number one pitching prospect in the team, he's probably second. And he's got top of the line rotation stuff to go in the future. So, and I think the only worry about this next goes forward. I'd like to see what happens. Is his innings count and and how can he handle a higher pitch count, going into 2024. So, I think, that'll come with time. And I think he's my pick for this year because he's still just supremely talented. And I'm very excited to see what he can do next year and potentially even compete for a spot in the pitching staff next year towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as far as me, I shouldn't have gone last on this one because I'm the least knowledgeable, so I'm going to bring the least to the table here. But I can come at it from the perspective of an informed fan, like most of our readers there on the site. Kind of know a little bit about the minors, follow it a little bit, and that's kind of my position that I'm in. I read Blake's stuff, I talk to him, I'm friends with Kyle. That's how deep my knowledge goes, right? And so for me, my view of the system, I was really surprised. I mean, I knew it. I hadn't really thought about it when they made all those trades at the deadline and just dropped them all in AA, AAA, and kind of filled up the rosters with these additions. I was like, wait a second. Now that I think about it, the fact that they were able to do that and not really displace players that I liked or knew really showed the dearth, the lack of the talent that was sort of in the high minors when that happened. And so, it was just sort of interesting to me how far they had fallen. And it wasn't necessarily because of a poor drafting or poor development. I mean, that's part of it. But a lot of it is because they've promoted players to the majors. I mean, Andre Palante at the bottom end, Zach Thompson, Matthew Liberatore, Jordan Walker started. If Jordan Walker had been in the minors for 3 or 4 months, like maybe he should have because of defense, we'd probably be talking about the system a little bit differently. But he was in the majors, and so Nolan Gorman, they promoted a lot of good talent up, and so as long as they're able to keep doing that, then you can have these little dips in the system, and they were definitely able to refill. So that was an encouragement. It leaves a very positive spin on the system right now. I don't know what the rankings will be, but it seems like they have 5 or 6 or 7, pretty talented arms and bats, kind of sitting in AA, AAA, ready to kind of make an impact as soon as next season, and that's always a good thing. So that being said, I can kind of steal from Blake a little bit because he said Luke and Baker, therefore he didn't say Ivan Herrera. And did either of you guys say Ivan Herrera? No. So Ivan Herrera would be my choice. I was going to go Mason. I actually figured one of you guys would take Mason Wynn, and I don't know that really Herrera would rank above Wynn, but it's so hard for me to look past what he did. A 147 WRC plus, batting average close to 300, slugging percentage close to 500, 20% walk rate for a catcher in AAA. Why don't you want that guy on the major league roster next year? You do. You absolutely want that guy on the major league roster. Sorry, Kisner. I love you, man, but you don't walk 20% of the time. You don't walk 10% of the time. So maybe he does. I don't think so, though. So Herrera had a tremendous year, 23 years old. Defense is improving and should be a major league, not regular next year, but I could see him getting at least 80 games in the field, not all of which are starts next year. So he's my offensive player. As far as pitchers, guys, I don't even know what to say. I mean, you've covered him really well. Tink was like my fallback because I thought because of his innings, no one would say Tink this year. So I don't know, man. I mean, Michael McGreevy made it to AAA, so there's something. A lot of disappointment on the pitching side until we made the additions. I'd love to say Graceffo, I'd love to say Jerpy, but injuries were a part of it, and so Bedell, Hintz. Most of the talent on the pitching side came over at the deadline. So unless I want to say Kloffenstein or Roby or Roberse, it was not a great year for the system. So, all right, that's our awards. Let's jump right into position by position. And this was Gabe's idea. I thought it was a really good idea. Instead of just going like level by level, which is what we did last year, and talk about AAA, talk about AA, talk about single A, what he proposed is that we go from the perspective of a depth chart, because like you just said, Gabe, the purpose of your system is to backfill and assist the major league roster. And so we're going to look at this from a depth chart, and I think we're going to try to go basically position by position. Is that kind of what you're thinking, man?
Yeah.
So we'll start probably infield and we'll work our way around until we get to the pitchers. I don't know whether we want to do relief pitchers. We could. But we'll see how far we go. So where do you guys want to start? You guys want to start catcher? Catcher good?
Yeah, works for me.
Okay. Now, in this case, we'll kind of set a depth chart. I'll let you guys just sort of jump in here. You can repeat names, whatever. This is not like a linear thing. We're just going to talk about it. So, Gabe, this was your idea. So we're going to start with you, and we're starting at catcher. If we're going to start depth chart at catcher, we've got Wilson Contreras, who's probably going to be our starter next year. Probably won't start 110 games in the field. So you've got Kisner, we've got Herrera. We don't know what will happen with that. And then we've got system guys. So go ahead.
Well, I'm operating under the assumption, correctly or not, that either Kisner or Herrera will be in the major leagues and the other one will be gone via trade. That's my assumption.
So you think that if they keep Kisner, Herrera will be traded? They won't hold him back with that extra option year in AAA.
Yes, I don't think they're going into next season with both guys still on them. I could be wrong. I know Herrera is another major league option, but I think at this point, either they think he's ready for the major leagues or they don't quite believe in him and they should trade him for a starter or something. That's what I think they'll do. We'll see. So I ultimately, I think Herrera is probably the future starter if he stays in the system. And then if you go further down the list, Bernal is clearly the next man up after that, I think. Maybe Jimmy Crooks, but
yeah, Jimmy Crooks is ending too.
Yeah, I mean Crooks is ahead of Bernal, to be clear, but I wonder if you plan to keep Herrera for all 6 years until he reaches free agency, I think Bernal will probably surpass Crooks while Crooks is the backup or something like that. If you keep everybody and everything goes to plan, which never happens. But and then Pedro could be a future backup if they decide to move on from Herrera and Kisner. So yeah, that's pretty much the three names that I've got who look like they should be in the MLB for the Cardinals if they aren't traded before that.
So who, and any of you can answer this, who's the Cardinals' fourth catcher next year? Not rostered, but actually they would normally roster three. So if you think, well, I guess we can have different answers to this, but so I ask you, Gabe, if they're going to roster Contreras and one of Herrera and Kisner, who's your third that's rostered? Is it Pajes?
Probably a minor league pickup.
Okay.
Like who's
back
the
to
guy?
Trace Pereira or something like that.
Yes, maybe Aaron Antonini, but I don't know about that one.
So someone off the roster right now. Crooks wouldn't be ready for that, or
no.
even, yeah.
No, definitely not a legit prospect. It would just be probably, if it's Antonini, he wouldn't be expected to play like at all, probably.
Yeah. Blake, jump in there. You got any farther down? You got an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, first off, actually, I think I agree with Gabe that there's either Herrera or Kisner is going to be on the roster and probably not both, because at this point, if the Cardinals don't believe in Herrera enough to have him overtake Andrew Kisner, who's literally never had a positive WAR season in his life.
Never had a positive WAR season in his life. Love you, man, but that's sorry. It's true.
If they don't think he can take Kisner's job, then I don't think there's a job that they think he can take anywhere in the majors at that point. So it's either or. And I understand wanting to keep depth, but honestly, at this point, I think I'd rather see what the Cardinals have with Pajes than knowing what we have with Kisner. So there's that. And then we kind of hit the big ones further down. Some of the two names that are interesting to me. One is Sammy Hernandez, the 19-year-old guy who came over from Toronto in the Genesis Cabrera trade, I believe.
Yep.
And he kind of crushed rookie ball. Not as good in single A as in his minimal time in single A. His exit velocity numbers, hitting specs, things like that didn't look great, but still young, and the success at rookie ball is notable. And then another one would be Carlos Linares, who is a little bit of an completely off the radar name. Not a ton of success at the plate, but he threw out 50% of base stealers last year. And the Cardinals have been moderately aggressive with him, considering his lack of success at the plate. And granted, it's still a backup catcher role to Jimmy Crooks and Bernal in the past 2 years, because he's not going to overtake them. But anytime we see a guy with an arm like that, who the Cardinals aren't having repeat levels despite not hitting well, he stands out a little bit to me.
So Adam, let me jump to you. And if you want to go a different way with this, then you can. But can you tell me? I mean, it seems like Jimmy Crooks, and we can also talk Bernal. I want to talk these two kind of, what would we call them? The legit prospect catchers. I mean, they are legit prospects. Crooks had like what one game at AAA, which that probably was a rostering thing or something like that. But in A plus, 11% walk rate, 122 WRC plus, 12 home runs. That's for a 22-year-old. This seems like a real talented catcher. What should I like about Crooks? Adam, do you know?
Well, I mean, Crooks is just a guy. He's an all around, like you said, a kind of all around guy who's, for me, is still kind of more of an organized kind of player, at least at this point. I mean, he does his due diligence to get on base, at least at Peoria. I mean, he was 21 years old, and like you mentioned, he had a cup of coffee at Memphis, and that's probably just a roster. They needed a catcher kind of situation. He's most likely to start at Springfield next year as a 22-year-old, which is, as a catcher, he's just right on line and he's doing really well. That being said, I think kind of feeding off of what Gabe and Blake have already mentioned, I kind of agree with, they said they're going to have one or the other, but not both. And I just simply because they're not necessarily because they're discounting Herrera's value. I think they're potentially going to be looking to, just because they have other needs, like, in the rotation, they just need to acquire a top end, cost control starter, at least via trade. And that's a different discussion. But I think if they're going to be doing that, and getting rid of a guy like Ivan Herrera, Andrew Kisner obviously will be staying, but obviously I'm really hoping that they keep Herrera. And I'm on record saying that if it were up to me, I would just have Herrera catch the full time and move Contreras to DH and, have him be your emergency catcher for whatever games. And then, then that way you can get 140, 150 games out of Contreras' bat. And then, like Gorman can figure it out in the field. Eventually he had that 1+ month in terms of OAA in June. Donovan, you can platoon him everywhere. Edmund will fill in where he needs to, and you can figure it out, right? I think everyone else aside from Contreras can at least play the field or like at least develop into a decent player, right? And Walker, what we hope can, fingers crossed, can stay in right field. But that's catcher. I mean, kind of going down. I mean, hoping Herrera stays. Crooks is pretty good. I like Crooks. We just talked about him. Sammy Hernandez and Bernal is the two that I'll just like stop at because I'm not sure and everyone else, but Bernal, I'm really hoping that he had like this absolute like nuke missile back in 2000, like the end of 2022 at Palm Beach. And I was super excited to see that, and I thought he was going to be just an absolute stud, and it kind of didn't work out this year. Hernandez, obviously Blake had talked about he was a lot better in rookie ball than he was at either Dunedin or wherever the single A affiliate is, or Palm Beach, right? So, but he does have a high walk rate, and he is 19 years old. So the plate discipline is, nice to see, even if he's not making the best kind of barrel accuracy just yet, or with a ton of power. So that's kind of my evaluation on the system. But if you ask me, there is such an obvious, not an obvious answer, but I feel like a light at the end of the tunnel kind of answer with catcher.
Yeah,
that it is kind of creative, but at least it fixes your value problem in terms of defensively behind the plate that you're going to have, regardless of whether you have Contreras there or not.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to start with catcher. I figured it would be our longest conversation. There's the most,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say flux, at the major league level, but there's some potential real movement there still. And then, multiple names that we have to talk about there that are performing well and working their way up the system. So some encouraging things there. Let's flip this. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, Gabe, go ahead, man.
One more name I want to ask you guys about because I don't know much about him. It was a 19th rounder, Grayson Tarlow. Do you guys know anything about him? He is 21. He had a 113 weighted runs created plus at low A, 18.6% walk rate, 15.3% strikeout rate. So he walked more than he struck out. He only had a 229 BABIP, which kept his line down, but he still had an above average line. Do you guys have any opinion on him at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a ton about him. I actually will say he has a good looking swing. So I'll give him that. He showed like a little bit of pop in college, and the walk rate obviously is higher than we can expect with him. But he did show some pretty decent discipline there in college as well. I think he was a smaller school guy, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of hard to tell how those numbers going to translate. But I mean, at least the swing looks good. So that's all I got.
Yeah, yeah,
Not 19th rounder.
yeah. Anything out of a 19th rounder is a pretty good deal. So. All right, let's flip the switch. Let's go to probably the most boring position as far as depth. But I mean, honestly, they will have a free agent there coming up soon. Let's go first base. So our depth at first base, and we'll start with Gabe. Go ahead, man.
It's I mean
Paul
at the-
Goldsmith.
I think we would ignore all these guys if they were at a different position and we had actual prospects to talk about. I mean, obviously there's Luke and Baker, who I wonder if they're going to bring him back next year or they're going to try to trade him for something. I don't know if he has any value. Is the problem with that?
He's got 2 option years. It looks like, and he's not Rule 5 eligible. So I mean,
yeah, I mean, depends on how tight the 40-man spot will be. I don't think they're going to like non-tender him or anything, but or
right?
DFA him.
Yeah.
But obviously, if they can get something back, I think they probably trade him. And then after that, I mean, I think first base in the future is something where like maybe Gorman moves over to first base, maybe Burleson moves over to first base. Long shot, Walker moves for like somebody in the major league team right now, or somebody in the minors who plays outfield will move to first base. I don't know if the actual first basemen who are defined as first basemen in the minor league system have any future as a Cardinal personally.
Yeah. Blake, any additions to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think
question here in a minute, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the bottom, William Sullivan's actually kind of interesting. He was a 13th round pick, I think. He's a little bit on the older side. He's first base only prospect, so like none of those things really stand out. But he really broke out as a senior in college, and he hits the ball really hard. He actually had a higher max exit velo in college than Chase Davis did. He hit the ball 118 with a metal bat, so that obviously comes down with a wood bat. I think Davis was at like 117.6 or something. So Sullivan just edged him. So I mean, not a whole lot of defensive upside. I actually watched one of the few Palm Beach games that was televised this year, and Sullivan looked pretty rough out there at first base, which isn't great, but it could have just been one bad game. But I mean, the guy can mash. So if he can hit his way through, there's at least a little bit of interest there. Not a ton of interesting guys ahead of him though. So maybe they push him a little bit if his bat proves to be interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting. Chandler Redmond, who's a name some of you might know. I think he was just named the Double-A Springfield Player of the Year. Had a lot of home runs, sort of a mini Luke and Baker season from him. Chandler Redmond is Rule 5 eligible, and so they'll either need to roster him or I don't think there's much risk of losing him. Who wants a Double-A first base?
Same age as Baker, by the way.
He's actually a little bit older than Baker because I've got roster resource from Fangraphs up, which I would say this episode was sponsored by roster resource at Fangraphs, but they're not sponsoring us, so they're just getting a free shout out. So I would highly recommend using that for this. So there's Chandler Redmond. My disappointment of the year, by the way, in the minor leagues would probably be Juan Yepes. We probably could count him as first base depth and had unfortunately a poor season. And so, yeah. Adam, do you got anything to add on first base or can we move on, man?
Oh, I mean, I was just going to talk about the guys. I mean, like you guys mentioned Baker and Redmond, who are essentially carbon copies of one another, as you know, Jeff, you mentioned, or not Jeff, sorry, JP. Going down the list, I mean, RJ Yeager had a monster season at Palm Beach before he was promoted to Peoria. So kudos to him there. And, LJ Jones was, semi-decent at Peoria. And then, obviously to make room, everybody was promoted up from the low minors. He kind of struggled in Double-A. In terms of like, the majors, you got Goldschmidt, who is, if he could very well just, retire at the end of next year. He'll be 37. I think people don't really think about that, but he could also come back. But then you also got Burleson, which, in my opinion, he shouldn't even be on the roster, right? I don't care how good of a contact hitter he could be. I just think that there's like plenty of other guys you could go with and just not enough room on the roster. So let some other team figure it out if that's the case. But, other than that, I'm scared for, what the future holds after 2023. I guess you can, in theory, you can move other guys around and maybe someone doesn't pan out on the field like a Gorman or Walker. Chances are one of them won't. You can put them at first base once Goldschmidt is done. But, other than that, I mean, maybe it's fine. They'll figure it out. But in terms of just pure first basemen, there's not a lot of depth there, which is fine. That's not a huge position of need. At the end of the day, you can swap guys around, and some will end up at first base.
Yeah. No. But let's jump to tempted to go across the diamond. I'm also tempted to combine these two. What do you guys think? Should we combine second base and third base together?
We might as well. In the minors, they're all.
I was going to say, it seems like we
Nice.
should.
Yeah.
I don't think that if you ask me, I don't think I could name a true minor league third baseman with the Cardinals. Right? I know they have, probably one or two, but I couldn't name them. So let's just combine second base and third base. And Adam, I'll start. That's not even what I meant. Blake, since you were just talking, we'll start with you. Second base, third base depth chart.
I mean, we've got the guys that we saw this year. Irving Lopez. Did we? Yunio Karakudo, I think, had a cup of coffee. I don't imagine those guys are even going to be in the organization next year. I could be wrong about that, but they seem pretty obvious DFA candidates, and Lopez might be the minor league free agency candidate. But I mean, I think the really promising guy is Thomas Ujasi here. I mean, there's really not a whole lot more to be said about him. He just kind of did everything, and it's interesting because I've seen a lot of places. I don't have any batted ball data on him because I only get that for single A and triple A where it's publicly available. So I'll be curious to see what I can see from him next year when he gets to triple A. But at least the reports from people who have data on him are that the data is just not great, which is why he's a little bit undervalued as a prospect. But I've seen just a lot of things that I really like from JC, like with how dominant he was in double A. Pitchers just literally stopped throwing him fastballs. It was just getting breaking balls at the knees in the dirt away from him. Didn't matter. He just kept hitting it. And the fact that he actually walked as much as he did, facing as many pitches that a lot of people chase as he did was impressive. So I like JC a lot. I think Cesar Prieto as we go down. I'm really not high on Prieto. Just not enough power. Way too aggressive. Just chases way too. I think you'd have I looked at this. I think a third percentile chase rate in the majors if we take his AAA chase rate up. And for a guy with really no power, it's kind of a tough combo. He's just going to have to run a really high batting average and BABIP to even be viable. And I really don't think he's that great of a defender, anyways. So I mean, he feels more like a tweener utility infielder kind of guy to me. But he does have some good numbers.
To play shortstop.
No, he's a second base, third base kind of guy.
Yeah.
He's really not even a particular.
That would be a little bit of a Descalzo like saving grace for him if he could, but I was getting the impression he couldn't either. So
yeah. So I mean that's really the interesting guys. Nick Dunn's kind of interesting because he just walks a lot, but the Cardinals almost 27, I think, and the Cardinals haven't given him a chance yet. So it's hard to see a ton of promise in that. But in his defense, he's also kind of like Prieto with almost a second base only kind of guy without a great glove, but the walks are at least interesting.
Does anyone have JC AA information, exit velocity, max exit? No, we don't have that, do we? Yeah,
I don't.
Do we have anything from AAA? I know we got some games up there. So
yeah, I can find some AAA data. If somebody else wants to talk,
go see what you can find. I'd love to see JC's, StatCast because the stats in AA, because like you said, he was getting just breaking ball after breaking ball. So impressive. 168 WRC plus, 662 slugging percentage, 331 ISO, and he's not even a power hitter. He just was pushing the ball wherever he wanted it. And I think the most important part about that, and the part that we forget sometimes, 21 years old. So even if he doesn't have huge, EV numbers at this point, he's still just 21 years old and dominated AA. That is just fantastic news any way you slice it. So yeah,
and also the where I get the single A and triple A data, it's from some Prospects Live thing that they put out, and they don't have JC on their site, so I got nothing for that.
Adam,
I was going to say, I just found his hardest ball this year at AAA, which obviously was a very small sample size, but it was 106.4. It was just like a regular out. It wasn't anything like he didn't actually get a hit on it, but his 90th percentile, like I guess 95th, we're looking how many PAs we got, 45 batted balls. So what is that, like your top like 2 or 3 PAs or batted ball events maybe?
Yeah.
That's like 104. I mean, like the thing is that he's not going to be a huge power guy.
Yeah.
The narrative is that he's kind of Brendan Donovan-esque because he plays a lot of positions, and Donovan went to drive line and beef up the power there, and obviously like that's just narratives to what suggests he could do, in theory. But either way, even if he doesn't, like last year, Brendan Donovan without the power beef was fantastic, right? And he was probably all-star. He's probably an all-star caliber player over the course of a full season when healthy and when he puts it all together. But in terms of Thomas Sajesi, I think he's probably going to in my opinion, his emergence makes Tommy Edman expendable. Just because, I mean, obviously Tommy Edman is a fantastic defender in multiple positions, but I think you can afford to trade that Swiss Army knife kind of player, especially when you got multiple ones, especially when you got such a need in the rotation, as we've already mentioned. You talk about Sajesi as one of the guys. Gorman could play second. Who else we got? I know we're going down the line. One guy Blake hadn't mentioned was Trey Richardson, who was drafted this year, who was is a pretty interesting guy just in terms of being an athlete with power at up the middle, which is pretty cool. Or at least potential power.
Yeah.
But really, aside from that, I think there's not a whole lot of depth at second base. Really, I think Sajesi is really your only guy. But other than that, I think it does make Edmund expendable if you can swivel around guys and if you put enough stock in Mason Wynn. But I guess if you really wanted to make the trade, I would do it because I value the pitching more than I would, the travesty that could be Mason Wynn next year at shortstop for the major leagues.
Yeah,
So-
and I'll just to add something else about Sajesi too. Just this is the interesting thing when it comes to like looking at data versus the eye test, and I feel like a lot of it gets looked at exit velocity, but Sajesi does a really good job of lofting the ball. So even if he doesn't hit it, he doesn't need to hit 450-foot home runs if he can just get it 380 to 400 feet over the fence. He really just needs to go to the Nolan Arenado school of pole hitting to maximize the power, but he already hits the ball in the air a lot more than Brendan Donovan did when he was in the minors. So that's at least a little more promising for future power output.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Gabe, I'm going to let you start. Let's just go ahead and jump because Adam was kind of leading us there. Let's jump to shortstop. And so, yeah, go ahead and hit that. And we'll talk a little bit about Edmund and depth chart and win and stuff like that. So yeah, go ahead and give me your shortstop look.
Well, obviously Mason Wynn is the the future shortstop. Now, how quickly that will be the case is up for debate. But I bet at the very least, most of us can agree by like August, he probably would be in the majors at starting at shortstop. And one really interesting guy that I don't know what to make of because of how the Cardinals have treated him is Jeremy Rivas.
Yeah, looking at his stats right now. Yeah.
Who has absolutely abysmal hitting stats. Apparently, his the Baseball Prospectus adjusted stats are closer to league average for high A, and which would maybe explain how aggressive they are with him because he's 20 years old and high A has a 66 weighted runs created plus. And it goes without saying because they really, really are high on his defense. He's a defense first player. I've just been confused because of how little power he's shown. I've not understood how they've been so aggressive, but I know in the AFL, I don't know if anybody has the stats. He's been killing it apparently, which is a huge surprise.
He's been killing it. He cooled off in his last couple of games. So like he literally has like maybe a home run and 3 doubles or something, which is basically what he did this year in Peoria in terms of power.
Yeah, he had 3 home runs all year in high A with 18 doubles and a .068 isolated power, which is
not what you want.
That's like you need to have a baseline level of power in the minors for me to think you're going to do anything in the majors, and that is decently below that, whatever level that is. But yeah, he's the most interesting guy at short besides Wynn for me, just because of clearly how high the Cardinals appear to be on him. Sent him to the AFL after his high A season, despite him being just 20 years old, or at least this is his age 20 season, and despite having hitting numbers that suggest he would get absolutely destroyed by AFL pitching, even in a hitting environment. So hopefully they're right, because he did show. I mean, his K to walk numbers are pretty strong. It's mainly the power and the BABIP that are concerning. But he's got a few years. He's only 20 years old, so he's the most interesting shortstop prospect aside from Wynn. And I'll let other people talk about Jonathan Mejia.
So does anyone want it, Blake? You got something on Mejia?
Well, see, there's like pretty much no data available on Mejia, and it's really hard to know what to make of both Dominican League stats and Rookie League stats. So, like, he literally killed the Dominican League and then was terrible in rookie ball this year, despite actually a lot of prospect places kind of pushing him high up their boards from the Dominican League success. So I'll be curious to see how he bounces back because I think the Cardinals even gave him 11 games in single A, which if they didn't believe in him, they wouldn't. I don't think they would have done that. So it's very possible that he just an 18-year-old just had a down year adjusting to life stateside in his second year since leaving the Dominican Republic. Which, like, I mean, you can't really blame him for that, but I think we all would have been a little more comfortable with rating him higher as a prospect if he'd actually come over here and killed it like he did in the Dominican.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, the thing with Mejia is that, he was the Cardinals like only like 18-year-old at single A this year, and like I thought he was potentially one of their breakout candidates going into this year. Obviously like it's like a swing. Even if he was like a league average, WRC plus at single A, I would think that he's probably at least going to be, maybe a low end starter potentially would be his median outcome if he's doing that at that age. But it was still really bad, and obviously I still think that Mejia has at least like his average outcome now I would say is probably like a depth, or maybe not a depth, like maybe like a utility infielder, maybe like not a starter, but I mean like because like even if it was just 30 to 40 games stateside, what he did was not good. Even if he had like a higher walk rate, the bat to ball just was not there, and he should be doing for a top prospect, quote unquote, and for a guy who played as well as he did in the Dominican League here, he should be at least around league average, or
I don't
a
know,
75
man, because
WRC plus would have been better
he
at
played a
single A.
lot of this season barely 18 years old. I mean, right now he's 18 years and 6 months. So 6 months ago he had just turned 18. If you tell me that an 18-year-old shortstop is gonna struggle with power and contact in the complex league and in A ball, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Even if they have good talent, I don't know that it has to be there yet. But we'll see. I mean, he's gonna have to show it at some point. So
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll say that's interesting about him too is like a lot of times when you look at Dominican Summer League stats, you'll see a lot of guys whose WRC pluses are really boosted by a high walk rate, which makes sense because a lot of these like 17-year-old Dominican pitchers just don't throw a lot of strikes.
yeah.
So when I see a guy like he had a 16% walk rate in the DSO, which is big, but he also had a 202 or a 212 ISO. So whenever I see a guy who actually shows power and hitting ability and isn't just completely boosted by walks, it's especially interesting. And then you factor in the fact I think the Cardinals signed him for $1 million or something when they signed him. So between the signing bonus and the early power and the fact that he plays shortstop, like am not out on him at all yet, but I just don't really. It's hard to properly evaluate players as young as him.
Yeah. The only thing that I wanted to add to the shortstop conversation, because it is sort of major league, it's just a little bit that I posted, I think, on Twitter, and it probably made its way over the site. But when we talk about win, I know it definitely made its way over the site. I remember talking about it. When we talk about win, even if we think that he's going to be an opening day starter and an everyday player, we probably need to think about that in terms of about 400 to 450 plate appearances. That's just about what rookies get for the Cardinals in the majors. Something inevitably causes them to have to either go down, or there's an injury, or they scuffle for a little while, or there's just a pecking order involved. And going something back to what you said, Adam, I can understand completely the temptation to trade Edman and put him on the block, and the need for a pitcher. And I'm not really denying all those things. I will say, though, that I think the Cardinals need a shortstop who's capable of playing about a third of the season as a starter there. And I don't trust Donovan to do that. And you look. I mean, Jeremy. There's no one else down the list. Let's say JC's gonna, maybe he can't. And then we just, Prieto can't. We just, determine that. So Edman might not be quite as expendable as we might like him to be, or they have to bring in someone, which is another approach they could take. I mean, that would be an option too. But if they already have Edman in house, it makes me skeptical that they're actually considering trading him. So.
Well, I mean, like it's the idea is that, as for as much as for as critical as I've been of Mason Wynn, the idea is that, he's a top prospect. You've got him on your
Yeah,
team. You might as well try him out and see what you've got. And then
yeah,
like that combined with suggests he's emergence.
yeah.
That was my theory.
Yeah, I understood. Yeah, I don't even necessarily disagree. It's just sometimes these PA things end up mattering more than depth chart ordering and stuff like that. So let's go on out to the outfield, and I think maybe we could divide this up a little bit, or maybe just be real specific in our conversations, because there's center fielders and there's corner outfielders, and those two players, especially in the Cardinals system, aren't necessarily the same type of player. And so you guys, we can run them all together if you want to, but let's talk outfield depth chart, center field, and corner outfield. And Gabe, will go with you on this one.
All right. Looking at interestingly, they have like three like legit center fielders in AAA right now. And Mike Antico, Victor Scott, and Michael Ciani. The problem with Ciani is we're not sure if he could hit even a little bit, but they got him off waivers, and it's not a bad waiver claim because he was a legitimate prospect not that long ago. I think as early as the beginning of the year, in fact. And then Antico, I mean, he sees nothing more than like a fifth outfielder at best, I would imagine. But Victor Scott, do you not agree with that?
Oh, fifth is awfully low. I think that there's fourth outfielder potential in there, like the way that he runs, and I think that the way his power, we're kind of getting off a little bit. Just depends on what you think of a fourth. If you think of fourth outfielders being So Taguchi and not like Dylan Carlson, then Mike and Tico could be a traditional fourth outfielder. But anyway, keep going. We probably don't disagree about him at all.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think So Taguchi is the fifth outfielder prototype. I know he's a little too good for that, but I know what your point is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Scott, I'm going to be confused when he's not put on top 100 prospects. I mentioned this before, and the reason why is there's what's this guy's name? Christian Pash, or what's his name? Is that his name?
Pache, I think.
That dude was like a really highly ranked prospect, despite never hitting at all in the minors, because purely on his defense and speed. And from the reports, that's basically what Scott has, where he's supposed to be an elite defender and elite speed. I know that's risky, but I don't really see how you could think that highly of Christian and think Scott isn't even a top 100 prospect. So I'm going to be really confused when he's not a top 100 prospect personally.
But, I mean, Pache was actually really good as a minor leaguer, right? I think the narrative that he'd never had an offensive season that was like good is a little understatement. Like as a 20-year-old, he had a 134 WRC plus in AA, which is really good, which even at that age with the lower with a higher aggressiveness is fine with the fielding that he is. But I guess like just with overall with Victor Scott, just in general, I think in terms of his upside, I would probably think that he's more of maybe a fourth outfielder, potentially a starter on maybe not a championship caliber team. Just because he doesn't hit for a ton of power, right? To me, he kind of is, he's very much a Ben Revere kind of profile, which, Ben Revere was fine. He's a great defensive center fielder and he steals a ton of bases, but you can probably count on one hand the number of home runs Ben Revere hit as a major leaguer throughout his entire career, right? So, and that's not a good thing. Obviously, Victor Scott has got some more power, but I just don't think, I think that ideally speaking, you have a better center fielder, like a better overall player, right? You want a guy, you obviously what their model is that you want the best player, the best player available in your center field. And I just don't think Victor Scott has that kind of upside. I think eventually he'll have a starting role in the Cardinals just because they don't have anybody else. But I don't think he's going to be a star caliber player. I think he very much will be a low tier everyday player. I think is probably his average outcome right now. Obviously if he taps into more power and that's going to change and really skyrocket his value, and he could turn into his 99th percentile outcome is basically Mookie Betts with just more speed. But that's obviously his 99th percentile outcome, and he's going to have to beef up a lot of power in order to get there, and improve his walk rate and his strikeout rate. But obviously, that's why it's a 99th percentile outcome. But I think with Victor Scott, he'll be fine there in center field, and kind of going down the line. Just very quickly, there really isn't anyone else that I believe in terms of these center fielders, at least that can be a full-time starter. I think, like you mentioned, Antico and Koperniak. And Ciani could at some point be depth guys in the major leagues and get their cup of coffee. But other than that, I just don't see a full-time role these guys carving out a full-time role at the major league level, except for maybe Victor Scott. And even then, it's like,
I will say the age was a good point, that how young he was. Although, aside from that one season you're referencing, he never had any power at all in the minor leagues. And Scott has 167 ISO at low A, 117 in high A, and 128 in Springfield. Now that's not a lot of power, but it's clearly more than Christian was showing. So that's my only point, is that it's the disparity between where he was at and Scott. Again, the age is a really good point, though. I will say that, because 20-year-old doing that is a different story. It just, I followed him because of fantasy baseball, like you know, I had a prospect league or whatever, and I just never really understood how he, because he clearly never looked like he was going to do anything on offense as I was following. So that's why his name popped up when I compare him to Scott, basically. But yeah, I'm clearly considerably higher on Scott than you are. So
yeah, no, fair.
Yeah, I mean, go for it, Jay.
I'm going to jump in because I actually have something to contribute for once. So when you go down the list, I've got two other center fielders I want to mention to you that we should consider center fielders and that are probably should be more interesting to us than Mike Antico and Ciani and maybe even Victor Scott, and that is Chase Davis, center fielder, and Won-Bin Cho, also probably a center. I'm not quite as confident on Cho, but the what I heard, this is all from I'm gonna forget his name, Daniel Guerrero, I think, from the Post Dispatch. Listen to a podcast with him. So just giving you my source, the only source of information. I have not watched him at all. But from what he was saying, Chase rated out very, very well in center field in just his brief amount of time. So that's encouraging. And then, Won-Bin Cho looks like he could probably stick there. Blake, do you got anything to add about either of those two guys in center field?
Yeah, I haven't seen much of Chase Davis in center field, or honestly in the
there hasn't been much of it,
so it's kind of hard to chime in on his defense. He didn't have the best year at the plate either, but I will say he has a ton of power. And I do think the hit tool is going to translate better than it did initially. I think the Cardinals strategy, at least this year, and they've done it in the past too, is as soon as they drafted guys, they said everybody signed and playing before the MLB or before the draft pick signing deadline happened this year. And I think really their goal is just sign these guys early, get them into games, see what they can do against pro ball and make adjustments in the offseason. So I'm really curious to see if they make any tweaks with Chase Davis. I'm still high on him. I haven't quoted on him at all, even after his tough year. And now for Won-Bin Cho, he actually is a guy I've believe in more after this year than I did last year. And that's even just from defensively. I got to see him a little bit when I watched a couple of Palm Beach games, and he just looks smooth out in the outfield. And it's different because he's fast, but he actually looks legitimately good at defense. Whereas a guy like Joshua Baez is fast, but he looks legitimately terrible at defense. Yeah. So he just does not. He doesn't take good routes. He just looks clunky. So I look at a guy like Joshua Baez, and I really don't rate him highly at all anymore. I think it's just not his athleticism doesn't play up to his straight line speed, and the bat just hasn't come around as much. But like a guy like Won-Bin Cho, who to me just has more tools, the bat looks pretty solid and the glove looks good. That's a guy that I believe in a little bit more.
Blake, I have a question.
Yeah.
Who played center field most of the year? Because Cho, I mean, just from the Cardinals' usage of him, suggested to me before you were talking about him, that he was a corner outfielder because he played only 19 starts in center. He started 56 games in right and 21 starts in left. So who played center field?
Yeah, I honestly don't even know, because the thing about Palm Beach is they have guys that go up and down all the time from rookie ball, and then guys that go up. I want to say like Nathan Church might have played a little bit of center field. If Aya DeCernia was there, he might have played a little bit of center field. I know Chris Rotundo played center field. I don't know if he was in A-ball all this year, but they kind of just rotated around with a bunch of guys.
That makes sense. Let's see what they got.
And I guess, the thing that's so intriguing about Cho is 19 years old, right? I mean, as young as you can be, 114 WRC plus in A-ball. I mean, he's a high schooler basically the last 2 years out there with 20, 21-year-olds, college players in some of these cases, and he's starting to look like he belongs. And the ball just jumps off his bat. So if you can play center field, we'll have plenty of time to see because he's not going to be a fast mover. Yeah, I mean, huge talent, huge prospect there for us. Any corners that we want to talk about?
I guess I didn't get a chance to talk about Joe, so I guess I'll
Yeah,
kind
go
of
ahead, man. Not sure. I mean, we're kind of hitting the
because
interesting players anyway.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, like I was gonna like slot him in right field, but I guess like I do 100% think he can be a center fielder. Like the article that I wrote earlier this year about him. I don't know if the record stood for the rest of the year, but at least throughout a majority that I checked like later on, and it still was saying that he had a really like ridiculous not like a ridiculous catch, but he covered a ton of ground in one catch, so much to the point where I think it was the most distance covered by any like outfield like put out in single A that year by, or at least in the Florida State League, right? And it was one bench show, and he did it in right field. The fact that he can cover over 130 feet of ground theoretically in one play, potentially more, leads me to believe that he could, he's like a 60, 70 grade runner. He probably a 70 grade runner, in my opinion. So you can stick him in center field. He'll figure it out. In my opinion, aside from Victor Scott, I think Juan Bincho is not too far off from being the second best defensive center fielder in the system. I would have him over Antico, just because of, the abilities at a younger age. And just in terms of just overall ability, Juan Bincho, has the frame to potentially develop into he has this superstar like goal. He has that Goldilocks kind of potential that Long and Hagen likes to reference. So Blake mentioned, he hits for a ton of power at the age of 19. The only issue, and it's the discipline is pretty good. The only issue, obviously, is the barrel accuracy, which is just dog crap right now. And I think there's a reason why he's only a 40 and not like amongst the higher echelon of teenage prospects right now, at least, is because he can't put bats a ball. But if he can, I think you're looking at a top 100 prospect. Like potentially higher with as much power as he has.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good for the outfield. We covered all the names, at least there's a lot more names. Obviously, every team has 4 or 5 outfielders. So other names we could talk about, but that's probably the names that we need to know. With probably about 5 minutes left here, let's go ahead and hit the starters. We talked about a lot of them, some of them in our, giving out our awards and mentioned a lot of names. The depth chart got a lot richer, at the trade deadline. So I don't know how we want to approach this. Give me as many names as you want, starters that we think have a chance to impact the major league level. And who wants to go first? Who's looking ready to go? Blake opened his mouth. Blake.
I can start us because I don't know if this is a hot take or all, but I'm ready to start talking about Takeo Roby as the best pitcher prospect in the system and not Tink Hens. I think the stuff is better, and it's like kind of close, but it's not particularly close how much better it is, in my opinion. Like the fastball just is livelier, might be harder. And actually, Roby came off the IL throwing harder than he had been before, which is interesting. I think he's got like 18 inches of induced vertical break on his fastball. Might be a little bit more than that, actually, which is kind of crazy. And his curveball is insane. I think honestly the only pitch I would prefer of Tink's is his changeup, which he actually doesn't throw enough. So I think if he starts throwing that more, that'll help him a lot. But I think Roby and Hens are the top 2, but I would put Roby at number 1. And then I mean, honestly, like this is where I think the Cardinals did the best at the deadline, was bringing in guys like Roby and Roberse and Kloffenstein, because those are 3 guys, upper level, legitimate major league potential in some capacity. And Drew Rom too, we can, I guess, include in there, but I'm not super high on Drew Rom. But yeah, they did a really good job of that. So I think between Graceffo, McGreevy, Robersa, Kloffenstein, Hens, and Roby all coming, that's a pretty strong upper level pitching pipeline.
Yeah, no, I would.
Adam, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I would agree with that. With the Cardinals going into the season, they had their hitting prospects, but having to address the pitching, the minor league lack of depth, I should say. They did their due diligence. Their due diligence there, and they did that. But I still think that they potentially could use some more like lower end arms. They don't have. I think they don't have as many teenage arms. I think they could be coming up. At least in rookie ball or in the DSL. The DSL was really bad this year just overall, but I think they could use more lower minor league pitching depth. They addressed the upper levels, right? Because they need to potentially have some help very soon. But I still think, just in general, I think it was a success overall with adding the players that they did. Just overall, I think with Tink Hence, obviously, Blake, I'll take your word over mine just in general because you know a lot more about this than I do. But I still think that with Tink Hence, he's like what, a year and a half younger than Takeo Roby and around the same. I think Roby will probably with a little bit of AFL experience here, he might start in AAA, especially with the age. But I still think Tink Hens has the opportunity to still be a top of the line rotation starter. Maybe second to Roby because Roby is still a little bit probably more advanced and throwing more strikeouts, even though he's a little bit older. But I'm still very intrigued about Tink Hens. I still think that he'll probably be, if not a 3 starter, potentially a 2 guy if he reaches his top end outcome.
For
Yeah.
me, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying, just to clear, I'm not down on Tink Hence at all, and I know you weren't applying. I'm not down on Hence at all. I just think we came in.
No. I didn't.
Just wowed me immediately, and just did 4 or 5, however many appearances he made.
Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah.
For me, because I agree with you, Blake, but almost for different reasons. Very practical, sort of like ranking sort of reading. Tacoby looks or Roby looks ready to go to AAA, where he's likely to get 25 starts. And it just puts him right on the cusp of the majors. Whereas I kind of think I'm not down on Hintz after his relatively poor performance in AA. I just wonder if he probably should have just spent the whole season at A+, working things out, getting his innings in. They held his innings so low that I would almost like whether him stay at A+ and then have a full season at AA just to see what he would do rather than seeing that little blip. And I think that blip might be knocking him down in some people's eyes, but just the fact that Roby's going to be in AAA and Hintz is going to be in AA and probably not capable of, escaping AA until late in the season, just from an innings perspective, puts Roby ahead of him in my mind, but not necessarily in stuff, although I think the stuff's close too. That's all I got. Gabe, go.
I'll say that Hence's performance is not as bad as it looks because
no, it's not. Yeah,
ridiculous offensive environment. It's probably closer to average than most people think.
Yeah,
and especially for jumping a level in the middle of the season at his age, I don't necessarily think we should look at it as even a blip personally. But I don't want to go back to outfield, but one guy I do want to mention is Noah Menlinger. Sorry, who walked, he struck out in AA. Yeah, he walked more than he struck out in AA. He has like no power, which is concerning. But he's 22. He's undrafted free agent. Awesome story. And then the guy we drafted last year, who was Zach Levinson, he had a 211 isolated power in low A in 34 games. Should be an interesting name. Sorry, I just had to mention those 2 names. Those are the only 2 names I had that I thought should be mentioned. As far as the pitching, I want to highlight a couple of the lower minor guys. Bryson Mott's had a very good season. Mm-hmm. Probably, I don't know if he surpassed Cooper Jerpy, but he certainly had a better year than he did. And I think they're the same age, and he did pretty well in low A. And then obviously Max. And who else do I got here? I'm kind of bummed we didn't get to see any of Austin Love because he got hurt immediately. I don't know if he had anything more in the tank, but his advanced stats were good. He just got kind of rocked from a BAPIP and homer perspective. So I was really hoping that he could take a step forward. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wait another year for that. And it'll be 25 in high A or AA. So that might be, you guys kind of covered the high end guys. Go ahead, Adam, name your guy.
So I was gonna mention Zach Showalter. I'm not sure if we got
I was just about to mention Showalter. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I won't talk too much so you can get some in about
I was just gonna mention him. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I just think it's pretty cool that the Cardinals were able to get a guy who, he was going to go to the University of South Florida, if I remember correctly, and he was, potentially going to be a higher selection than he actually was. I think it was like an 11th or 12th round pick. And probably could have been like a higher draft selection had he actually, showed a more demonstrated interest in being a professional before, Michael Eyes was like, here's whatever X amount of dollars. Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to sign instead and be a professional. But like I said, had he shown a higher interest in playing professionally, probably would have been a higher pick. So, getting him in that deal for Flaherty, as like a deadline dump off, and considering how bad he was with the Orioles, this trade looks like an absolute steal. Even if Prieto is not really much, and I think whoever else they got for him, and I think this is a pretty decent acquisition as Zach Showalter. Even if he got hurt, I'm intrigued to see what he does, especially with the guy who's striking out as many batters as he is. At least in at Delmarva when he was pitching there.
Yeah, Showalter is my favorite part of that deal, honestly. Yeah. Like Rom and Prieto might be major league contributors, but they didn't really have the ceiling. I think Showalter has the ceiling that those two lack.
And then another young arm, Alec Willis, who just can't stay healthy.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the only issue with him. He had really good numbers in complexly, but I don't know how much we could take from that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't really feel the need to go. We covered the starters. A lot of the starters we mentioned will drift over in the relievers. There's some probably pure relievers that maybe are worth a mention, but we got time constraints, so we'll get them some other episode. We'll do some like minor league relievers episode that 3 of you will watch, and it'll be great. But I think that's good for now. Is there any names that any of you have? I want you to give one final shot here. Any names that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to bring up today, that sort of a need to know kind of name that hasn't been mentioned yet?
I feel like, I wouldn't be able to explain a lot about him, but Zuniga is probably an intriguing bullpen arm just because he throws gas, right? Blake would probably go into more detail about him, but
Yeah, Zuniga's interesting. Strictly from a stuff perspective, the Cardinals are going to have to tweak something to make it work. I think that was actually my biggest gripe with the way Zuniga and the Cardinals kind of handled things this year, is he didn't really change anything from last year. And when a guy has stuff and not results, like he's just begging for a tweak to unlock him. So hopefully next year. I think sticking with the relievers, a guy I would mention is Matt Swanson, if I'm even saying that right. The guy who came over for Paul DeYoung. The numbers are really good, but when the Cardinals, first off, that was the highest for the Cardinals to get anything for Paul DeYoung, considering how he fell off a cliff at the end of the year. But Swanson's interesting to me. I'm going to throw out a comparison, which I hate making. He is like a very, very, very light version of Jordan Hicks to me. And it really just like stood out to me with the arsenal and with the mechanics. When I watch him pitch, it just kind of reminds me of Jordan Hicks. But then I look at him, he's kind of like a power sinker slider guy. And they both play up in the zone because of the arm slot. And they play up and down. You can work it in and out. The stuff is really good. He gets a lot of strikeouts. Like, I think he's a little old probably for the levels that he's been at, but that's just because the Blue Jays didn't push him aggressively enough. I think the arm talent's there, and I do think he'll be a big league contributor in the bullpen.
I agree. I've said as much. Yeah. Gabe, do you have anyone else that we haven't mentioned you wanted to mention?
Well, we mentioned him, but not really in the starting pitching part. Ian Bedell, I think he reemerged as a guy who we maybe should pay attention to.
And could move fast.
Yeah, he could. And I think they kept him in high A only because of his injury concerns. I think he would have been a double A if they didn't have just wanted to focus on him staying healthy, basically. But he'll be 24 in double A, which is not young. That's the only concern, I'd say. But that's because of injuries, obviously.
And COVID plays a part in that too a little bit. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's a guy that we should have maybe like on the podcast here soon, I think. So that'd be a lot of fun. A Mizzou guy. So great. Well, hey, there we go, guys. That is our minor league preview episode from the perspective of a depth chart, which will be a little different probably than you'll get from other places and other sites, if anyone even bothers doing a minor league review, because we might be the only ones that are doing it right now. So take that, world. But lots to talk about, lots to do. Our next podcast will be in 2 weeks, right at the start or end, depending on what day we publish, of the GM meetings, which should kind of kick off the transaction period. There'll be some news that will come out around then about non-tenders and some other things, and we'll probably start getting some reports about who the players, who the Cardinals are interested in, who they're talking to. Probably won't have any deals yet, but you never know. Could happen. The Cardinals might jump the market, and that would be a good place for them to start. So for Adam and for Gabe and for Blake, we thank you so much for sticking with us this season. We got more content to come and always stuff on the side as well. So we'll see you around there, but have a very happy Saturday from Viva El Bordos. Thanks. See you next time.